everyone, welcome to Focus Talk. As a result of the Trump-Xi meeting at G20, US and China agreed to a ceasefire in trade and set a 90-day time frame to negotiate the most contentious issues, including the intellectual property theft, forced technology transfer, and non-tariff barriers, the so-called structural issues. Now, why are these issues so important? Why is it that the Chinese Communist Party has not even admitted it, let alone to address them? Today, we have Dr. Jason Ma joining us to discuss these issues with us. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with this first question.
Right.
What really caused the imbalance of US-China trade? In other words, how come China exports much more to US than they import from the US?
Oh, right. I think the popular answer is China has a cheap labor. I mean, almost everyone's saying at least many years ago, 20 or 30 years ago.
And that's why they become the world factory, is that?
Yeah, at the least kind of, I think that's people's kind of popular thinking. They always think, whenever they think about China, they think about, okay, $1 can survive a week, those kind of living expense, so they can be almost free work, those kind of thing. But first of all, it's no longer true right now because, in the past 23 years, Chinese GDP growth about 14 times. It's no longer like 20 or 25 years ago. It's Chinese right now. China's GDP is already kind of ranked number 2, or in some way to calculate, it's already ranked number 1. And also meanwhile, Chinese labor is no longer as cheap as the kind of people. It's still cheaper in the US. It's not as cheap as people kind of think in US think. For example. Some kind of manufacturer kind of workers can make something around $800 or $700 US dollars a month. Yeah, with some kind of overtime. But we have to admit one thing. I mean, it's true. It's taken much longer time for Chinese worker to gain this kind of income increase. Like we know many other kind of place, whenever they have this dramatic increase of GDP, and they immediately have this dramatic increase of income. It happened like in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in South Korea, and those kind of countries. But in China, for many years, it was not happening. It's a kind of for the first 10 or 20 years. The Chinese labor's income was almost maintained as a very low, and that gave China some kind of a manufacturer kind of advantage. The major reason behind that part is this kind of a citizen registration system in China. In Chinese, it's called hukou. Basically, when Chinese born, they naturally was assigned to one of the 2 categories of citizens. One category is if the people was born in a city, they call that city people. If the people was born in rural area, they call that farmer. So that's associated with the people. This status associated with people. And for those, farmers, they for many years, they cannot really freely live in a city. And whenever a city they come to work, they get them to the city. Whenever they don't need it, they kick them back to the farm area.
So they're cheap labor, even inside China. They're relatively cheaper labor compared to other people in the city.
they are cheap laborers. I mean, basically the point is because of their status, social status, they cannot ask for anything beyond their eat and living. I mean, they cannot ask for example,
expense.
Their health insurance or retirement benefit, those kind of things. For many years, they just the only thing in exchange of their labor is basically surviving in the city. And this happened for almost close to 20 years. That gave China a very clear advantage in the sense of labor cost.
The labor cost is not the only cost of the product.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, labor costs in many kind of manufacturers, they only like cost about 10 to 20% of the like the whole
of a product. So they accounted for 10 to 20%.
20%. I mean, it's only about kind of Chinese labor. The only benefit you can get is 10 to 20%. But of course, at the very beginning, like 20 years ago, Chinese government indeed provided some other benefit to the foreign investors. Like they give you almost free land, they give you some tax benefit, but they get rid of those actual benefit to the foreign investors in the past 10 or 20 years. So this is a part where kind of you can clearly see this actual benefit is already kind of shifted from foreign investors to many other like state-run enterprise. Overall, my understanding is if right now Chinese product still have some kind of competitive advantage over U.S. products, they are mainly because of some other reasons.
Like what?
For example, people still think manufacturing in China cheaper because, for example, the environmental regulation is although they have all kinds of laws, environmental laws, but the reinforcement is almost non-existing.
Zero.
So this is the part. And another part is, for example, the kind of I said state-run enterprise or companies. Those companies they got actual kind of subsidies, like for example financing. The Chinese Communist Party own those kind of companies. Meanwhile, they also own all the banks, and meanwhile they also own all the lands. So they can like establish kind of some kind of project. Then under the banner of this project, they give free land to some state-run or kind of Chinese company. So that is like the land real estate cost is almost reduced to zero. And also they can ask, because they own the bank, they can ask whenever they need a stimulus in the economy, they ask the banks to almost give the free money to the state-run enterprise. And also the tax benefit, and also the licensing, all this kind of, for example, they only allow a state kind of owned company to run this energy or communication, those kind of areas. So by give them this exclusive like a right to operate in certain industry, then
like infrastructure
then you really give them extra benefit. And beyond that, because China is also controlling this currency, and the Chinese currency is an amazing thing. I mean, for example, if you look at like the surplus in like the Chinese trade over U.S. or even globally, China is making a lot of money by this exporting because they have this huge surplus in the exporting. From this perspective, renminbi should go up. The value should increase because every year they're making more kind of money from many other places. But meanwhile, in order to stimulate the economy inside China, Chinese Communist Party also printing money within China like crazy. And they are printing like, although their GDP is only like 70% of US GDP, but they are printing probably twice as much money as US printing kind of US money. We already kind of feel like US is printing too much money. Some people are complaining, but the US is somewhat kind of every year they call it M2 type of money.
Yeah.
This kind of money, they are about, US generate about 70% of US GDP, that amount of money. But the Chinese is generating about 100, around 200% of their GDP.
In past 10 years, 15 years?
Just last year,
okay.
last couple of years. But the way is like basically kind of, it's amazing their GDP is only grow like 5 to 6%. Because they already printed like more money than their current GDP. I mean, if you just kind of don't do anything, you should grow like probably more than 5-6%. I mean, so their 5-6% is really, really kind of distorted kind of growth. But this should reduce their money value. So you can see the renminbi internally should reduce value, externally should increase value. But for some reason, they somewhat kind of maintain their exchange rate globally just because they closely control their currency. The way to control the currency gives their very special kind of a competitive advantage. For example, their company can have some kind of predictable like a future about how much money they spend, how much they sell. I mean, because their control of the currency gives their company this kind of leverage over many other kind of country who have a free exchange kind of currency. And another thing is they tightly control some areas, for example, information IT area. Almost all the US IT company, when they try to get into China, they failed or they even can't get into. For example, when Google tried to get into China, they ran into all kinds of issues and then have to quit China in 2012. And Facebook can never get into China. But US indeed is making money by this kind of service. I mean, US, we know global-wise, US trade deficit global-wise is about close to 600 billion. But indeed, in the sense of goods, US, the deficit is about 800 billion. But because US is making money globally, about 225 billion by service, so US end up kind of, the deficit is reduced. But in China, a lot of this kind of service you cannot get into China. For example, the financing, for example, IT service, all this kind of area, US is making money globally, cannot make any money from China.
So let me understand it. You're saying on one side, China is making money because from the manufacturing, some industries, because they can maintain the cheap labor, they can sacrifice the environmental thing, and they can use state control power to control resources. But on the other hand, areas where other countries or U.S. companies can make a lot of money, they refuse to let them go in.
Right, that's the case. I mean, you know, I mean, basically kind of China is kind of U.S. In the global trade, U.S. to China, U.S. lose China like a 60% of the global deficit. It's a kind of ranked top. I mean, all other countries, Japan, Germany, I mean, they all like added together, they are kind of U.S. lose 40%, but to China alone, they are losing 60%. Why? Because although Germany is also kind of making money in goods, like sell a lot of stuff to U.S., but meanwhile they are buying U.S. service, financial service, IT service, all these kind of things. So this make up some kind of make this trade balance a little kind of not that severe. Same thing happened to kind of Japan, and also happened to Canada. I mean, so even like Mexico, I mean, the trade deficit is not that huge just because they are opening their service area, so U.S. service can get there. But in China, no, that's not the case.
Why though? Because we don't have that much time. Why is it the Chinese Communist Party has been so reluctant to even admit these issues, let alone to address them?
I mean, because all these kind of issue is something it's very difficult for them to relax, to lose the control. For example, I mean, the information technology. I mean, Chinese kind of Communist Party ruling China by this kind of media control. I mean, and control the way Chinese to acquire kind of information is one of the foundation for them to continue ruling China with this kind of authoritarian kind of and so it's very difficult for them to like let something like Google to get in. Although at this moment I heard about like Google is ready to kind of
but they're ready to go in with the censored
search engine. I mean, this is something kind of last time they were indeed like before 2012, they indeed have a censored search engine inside China, but China still doesn't like it because it's a foreign company. I mean, they still at the end of the day they use their great media, the public media to kind of saying kind of Google
bad
is
things,
Google. And at the end of the day, Google has to quit China. I mean, I don't see anything change right now in China. So the way Google try to get into China, think they can make money this time, is something I really can understand. This is a fundamental thing. I mean, of course, currency control and subsidize to their state-run enterprise, all these kind of things is a foundation about their ruling, kind of the way they can rule China. If asking them to give up this is equivalent to asking them to give up their power. So
they're like, if I lose all these things, you don't need me. Why am I still here?
Right.
The Communist Party.
That's exactly the case, right?
I see. Okay, well, this is the too big a topic, and I know you have a lot of stories and examples to give us. So maybe we can continue the conversation in a different episode. But thank you very much, Jason, for coming here today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll hope to see you next time.